Okay, we're ready.
All right, good morning. I'm Damian Meyer, Chair of the Citizens Clean Elections Commission for this year. Agenda item number 1 is call to order. It is 9:30 a.m. on August 25th, 2022. And I call this meeting of the Citizens Clean Elections Commission to order. I'd like to ask the audience members to please keep their microphones on mute. And with that, we will take attendance. Commissioners, please identify yourselves for the record.
Commissioner Mark Kimball, I'm present.
Commissioner Amy Chan, here.
And then Commissioners Payton and Titla are not attending today, correct, Tom?
I'm on the line.
Oh.
Sorry.
Steve Titla not on the line.
Excellent. Okay, Commissioner Titla's here. Is Commissioner Payton on the phone?
No.
Okay, so just to clean up that record, we have 4 of us are present, Commissioners Chan, Kimball, Titla, and then me, Damian Meyer. Second item on the agenda is discussion and possible action on minutes for the July 28, 2022 meeting. Does anyone have any comments or correction to the minutes?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Commissioner Chan.
I move that we approve the minutes as written.
Okay, I have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
This is Commissioner Kimball, I second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the minutes. I'm going to, we'll vote on that. I'm going to call the roll. I'm going to start with Commissioner Titla. How do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Chan,
Aye.
Commissioner Kimball,
Aye.
and Commissioner Meyer, and I vote aye as well. So the minutes have been approved unanimously. Next, we'll move right along to item number 3 on the agenda, discussion and possible action on Executive Director's Report, enforcement and regulatory updates and legislative update. Tom, please, the floor is yours. Please let us know what's happening.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Thanks for being here. All of you. We have obviously Commissioner Chan and Commissioner Kimball here in this hearing room, which is great. First time we've all been here for this since I think 2020, February or something like that. So that's pretty cool. So just to go through the Executive Director's Report, then we have the primary election was canvassed on the 22nd. Turnout was 34.92%, which is pretty high for primary, I think, right? Yeah. Was that record high? That was record high for a midterm primary. So that was exciting. And we'll be coming in the next few weeks on the voter registration deadline and early voting for the general election. Our legislative debates kicked off this week, and our statewide debates will begin in September. We have a schedule posted online. A couple of things we're working on there. On Friday, we have a deadline for some candidates to RSVP to us for a debate. So we will be hoping to hear from them. That'll give us some sense of where we are on the statewide debates. One issue we do want to kind of note briefly is, we're working on and looking at the issue of scheduling and working through the schedule. We did end up, our gubernatorial debate is currently scheduled to be on Yom Kippur. Now, we have had a discussion internally with our the folks we've been working with at PBS, the Broadcast Association, the Newspapers Association. The debate itself is going to begin right around sundown, and then there's a lot more rebroadcast and streaming opportunities and internet opportunities than there have been in the past. So as of this point, we have not. We have not moved the date. However, obviously, there's some considerations there, and I want to make sure that you all are aware of where we are on that. And we can return to that as well if anybody wants to talk about it as part of this report. We have, as you can see, Avery and Gina have been continuing to do a lot of outreach activities. I think that, I just want to say that, with the debates, the voter education guide, as I should have noted, we're finalizing, Avery, Gina, and Alec, and Mike and Paula have all been, really been very busy but continuing to be accessible to people around the state when they have questions and when they are need information on voting and the like. So, but this is, basically June and August are kind of crunch time for our work. It's a little bit different than maybe the rest of the election community, but certainly it's a busy time of year. Mike, Paul are continuing to work on our getting us installed in our new offices, which are down the street from here. If anybody ever wants to visit, they're in what we used to think of as the DEQ building. I think they now call it the Natural Resources Building. It's 1110 Washington, and I've been in there pretty much, I don't know, three days a week for the last few weeks, and it's been great. It's a nice facility, it really is. You can see the candidates, clean candidates who have moved on to the general election there, and as well as the participating candidate numbers, and we've begun the auditing. Couple of quick other notes. So, and I don't need to go on so long, but we are still waiting as of this. So as noted there, this Legacy Foundation Action Fund case, which is a enforcement matter that has been around since 2014, is now at the state Supreme Court. They had a conference on the 23rd. The results of that conference have not entirely been published as of an hour ago, and I haven't gotten a chance to go back. So we don't know if that is Legacy Foundation's petition for review, and we filed a response back in May. And so now this week happens to be the state Supreme Court's very long agenda. They come back from the summer break. They do rules, they do a ton of motions. The petitions calendar is very long. So taking a couple of days to get that out is not extremely extraordinary. But if we find out in the course of this meeting, we'll let you know. We did have a story in the Republic recently that I think many of you ended up voted in on. I think all of you ended up voted on. Regarding the appointment process for the commission. We are without the initiatives. We now know that it appears that the Voters' Rights to Know initiative will be on the ballot. The Predatory Debt Collection Protection Act, I believe, will be on the ballot. I think there's still not clear. There's still court action remaining on the Arizona for Free and Fair Elections. Then I think that's kind of it. The regulatory agenda 305 and 306 are on this agenda for public comment to potentially initiate public comment. So I think that kind of covers it. Gina, Mike, Paul, is there anything else you want to make sure we? Kara, anything else we need to?
Not for Tom.
Okay. Well, Commissioner Chairman, I would, if you all have any questions, that sort of completes our report.
Thank you. Tom, I had a question on the primary turnout. I know that was a record high. It's still sort of disappointing to see only, essentially a third of registered voters vote in that primary. Do we know, do clean candidates tend to do well in their elections? Have we ever looked at that? Like what their record percentage is?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, commissioners, in this particular election, we had clean candidates for, one of the first times I think in the recent past, beat either incumbents or sort of what you might call, or office holders moving from the House to the Senate and the Senate to the House in a primary. That is something that I think relates to, in part, the tactical decisions that those candidates are making. Really, that's the main driver of this, right? So the candidates who are running successful campaigns in the public financing program in a primary, they're tending to use tactics that are focused, I think I say this anecdotally anyways, that are more focused on grassroots canvassing perhaps than, sort of the mailer driven campaigns that might be more popular with some incumbent or essentially incumbent legislators. So I don't think we have a precise number. We could do it. I think we could do a run through on that, but I will say that it is the conventional wisdom about the public financing program is that it does not provide sufficient funding to allow a person who is an outsider essentially to take on an incumbent who has that fundraising advantage, and in so doing, diminishes obviously the anti-corruption impact of the program. This session, this election, this primary season, especially on the Democratic side, that proved to be not a rule, and so I think that may allow for some review there. So we have a little bit of data, I guess, but so direct answer question, we have a little bit of data from this election. That data looks different than what we've seen in the past, but we could do, I think, a broader look at that over time.
Because I think that could be useful data as a way to, it's an education piece for candidates. And maybe, people who may want to run for office that think I can't, raise the money to do it and I can't win if I run clean. If they see that, clean candidates are doing well and fare well, that may promote more people to run. So I think that could be useful information. And then the other question I had on the primary turnout was, we do a ton of voter education work. And one of the things that we did this year that I observed and tried to retweet and promote was, letting those independent voters know that they can vote in the primary if they request the ballot. Do we know of the, approximately 1.5 million voters, do we know how many of them are independents? And what our percentage of independent registered voters were? And this might be more available on the recorder's office. I was just curious if that's something we've looked at to see how effective our education piece on that is.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I think I would kind of defer to Gina if you.
Over here. One moment. To the right of Commissioner. Oh, okay.
And if we don't have this, it's fine to sort of put this on next month's meeting agenda. I just think it's interesting for us to know internally some of this stuff.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I don't know the numbers for the full state, but I can tell you for Maricopa County, independent voter turnout was about 14%, which is about average. So that is average.
Okay.
Yes, it is on par. And again, independent voters, they are right up there as part of one of our main voting blocks in terms of numbers of registered voters. But again, I don't have that total statewide. We do have to take a look at each county and look at the number of partisan ballots that were requested by independents, but for Maricopa County was about 14%.
Thank you. And any of the other commissioners have questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Kimball?
to that last point, I was going to bring that up too. I worked as a poll worker in the election, and from my experience there and from numerous letters to the editor I've read in various publications, there's still so much confusion about independence. At the poll I was working, I had, I don't know, more than a dozen independents who came in, said, you have to choose a Democrat, Republican, Libertarian ballot. No, not Libertarian, Democrat, or Republican. They said, I don't want to do that. I want an independent ballot. And it's, I don't know, I found it surprising that this is still so widely misunderstood. And I think there's still a perception that if I'm an independent, I cannot vote, or if I do, I go in and ask for a Republican or Democratic ballot, then my registration has changed, and it's just a continuing source of confusion. I don't have any suggestion, but it's, as an independent, I find it frustrating. The second point, on a different matter, the gubernatorial debate, I'm somewhat concerned that we're at this point scheduling it on Yom Kippur. It seems like if there's any possible way of changing it, it seems like we should, because it seems likely to lead to some negative publicity or some controversy that I think would detract from the substance of the debate. I don't know anything about the complexities of changing it to another date or the possibilities or the logistics, but if at all possible, I think it would be a good idea.
Commissioner Chan? Yeah, I think
Oh,
you
yes.
were
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was waiting to see if you were going to say something and I didn't realize.
no, I appreciate Commissioner Kimmel's comments. I think it makes sense, of course.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree. I think probably if possible, it would be wise to try to reschedule that if at all possible. And as Commissioner Kimball alluded to, I'm not certain what the complexities might be, but maybe Tom can work on that with, I know he's got a lot with all of the debates. Okay, I wanted to just make a couple of comments. Well, maybe just one. The Republic article featuring quotes from all of us, I just wanted to clarify because my quote was, what I stated in the article, which was reflected, was that this is a burden. And I just wanted to make clear to the commissioners and the staff and the public that there was context to that and there's some nuance to that, because the context, of course, was the point of the article, which is that we're all serving expired terms. And I think all of us would not be here if we didn't believe in the service that we are, participating in and believe in the mission of this commission. And I just wanted to make sure that you all know, because I care what you think. I don't want anybody here to think that I simply view this as a burden. I think we all recognize that, having a meeting once a month isn't a huge burden, but it is. I mean, it's a time commitment. And frankly, in that context, I appreciate seeing you all here today, but I think in the future, I would, with all due respect to Commissioner Kimball, I really appreciate being able to participate virtually. I think it helps, particularly considering the fact that we all have expired terms and have lives to conduct outside of this office. So I just wanted to make it clear that the Clean Elections Commission's work and mission is still of utmost importance to me on a personal and a professional level. And I just didn't want any confusion about what my quote might have meant for anyone here. And if anybody has questions about that, please feel free to ask me. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Chan. Appreciate that. Commissioner Titla, do you have any comments or questions on the executive director's report or any other comments we've had or made?
No, thank you. Yeah, thank you. No.
And then before we move on, I just want to, Commissioner Chan, I understand why you wanted to make those comments. I know, I certainly don't doubt your commitment to this commission. So, so I appreciate you saying that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Tom, do you have any follow-up information after any of the questions or comments from the commissioners? Or are you ready to move on to the next agenda item?
Mr. Chairman, thanks. I mean, I suppose I should just say, well, we don't have the debate set up as an action item, but we can take, we take the comments of the commissioners, with seriousness, and we'll be looking at that. We will, as I mentioned, we'll have the RSVP for some of these on Friday, so that'll give us a little better sense of where we are, and we'll try to mitigate that as best we can.
Great. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item number 4, which is discussion and possible action on MUR 2022-01 Freedom's Future Fund.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Chan.
If I could just ask a quick question about this item. My understanding is that this involves the governor's race, and in my other job for items that involve the governor's race, because of the fact that the person I ultimately work for is running for governor, our office over there has been referring these matters out. And so I just wanted to bring that up because I think, even though I know I could be impartial, I just would like to, out of an abundance of caution, avoid any appearance of impropriety or potential conflict of interest. And so I wanted to throw that out there. I was thinking I should recuse myself from considering this matter.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Chan. And I think that was already my understanding going in, because we have talked about those issues, and I certainly understand why you're taking that position. So thank you for those comments. But so moving forward with that, Tom, we have a reason to believe recommendation from you and your capacity as our executive director on this matter. Commissioner Chan is not going to be participating, but we do have 3 other commission members here, so we still have a quorum. And I'd like, Tom, for you to introduce the item, give us an overview, and then, of course, if we have questions, we'll let you know. And then I also see Mr. Spears. I'm sorry, is it Spies?
Spees, but close enough.
Thank you. I apologize, Mr. Spees. And is Ms. Bartlett on the line?
She's in the office with me, but I'll be speaking.
Okay, and they're the attorneys for the Freedom's Future Fund. Some of Mr. Spees' correspondence was in our packet. So that will sort of kind of be the order we take these items in. So we're going to start with Tom. So Tom, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, by way of introduction, I want to, this concerns some advertisements that were run in the throughout the spring and the winter, spring, and summer. I want to first make a quick record. As you can see in the recommendation, there are 2 parts. There is a part 1, which deals with the express advocacy question, and a part 2 that deals with reporting. Part 2 deals with 2 different kinds of reports. It deals with reports under 16941B and 16958, and reports under 16926. For purposes of today, based on representations that Ms. Bartlett's made to me about other expenditures, or I shouldn't say expenditures, other spending that Freedom's Future Fund has made, I'm not going to ask at this time to move forward on reason to believe on the 926 primary purpose part of this recommendation. So I just wanted to say that up front because it's something that I think is important, and I wanted to make sure you all know that if that changes or what have you, we'll come back to it. But at this point, we have some representations from Freedom's Future Fund regarding their purpose and their spending that I want to make clear I'm not asking for there to be any determination of reason to believe about the primary purpose of Freedom's Future Fund today.
And Tom, just so make sure that we're on the same page, when you say primary purpose, you're talking about the organization Freedom's Future Fund in and of itself, and we're not talking about the primary purpose of the ad. Right? We're talking about the organization, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
So this would be part 2 of the memo, essentially 16926, and the primary purpose analysis. We're not asking to make a determination on reason to believe today.
Okay.
And Mr. Spees may have further record he wants to make on that. I'm not purporting to foreclose that. It's just, this is my agreement with them, I think. So if you all have had the opportunity to review the memo, the issue here is principally focused on advertisements that identify Kari Lake, although not per se as a candidate for governor, although we think that it's established, by the case law and how it, as it works out, that Kari Lake was a clearly identified candidate for governor. In the advertisements, that the advertisements are express advocacy because when objectively evaluated as a whole, the advertisement we reviewed, which is in the materials at the YouTube link, and the evidence of other advertisements that we were able to glean from the FCC filings together allows us to determine that there is reason to believe a violation may have occurred here. The violation is that if you have an express advocacy piece of literature advertising, and you under 6941D and 6958, once that spending reaches a threshold with regard to a particular candidate, a filing is due, and those filings have not been made. We've reviewed the case law here, primarily Committee for Fairness and Justice, which is a 2014 Arizona Court of Appeals case concerning similar facts, and then a case called Fergatch v. Federal Election Commission, which is a 1987 or 86 Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals case that concerned the constitutional application of the Federal Election Campaigns Act. And the language, the test that Fergatch articulates, at least in our view, is the test that's in Arizona statute and the test that's applied in Committee for Justice and Fairness. And essentially that means, does the advertisement have meaning such that no reasonable person could differ that its purpose was to advocate for or against, for the defeat of or in favor of the election of a candidate, a clearly identified candidate. That's sort of the summary of our position. Obviously, because Mr. Spees is here, I think that would, that's all I have at this point, unless the commission has questions of me.
Any commissioners have any questions at this point? Okay, let's go ahead and I'll turn this over to Mr. Spees.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the commission for the opportunity to speak today. As noted, I'm Charlie Spees. My colleague, Jessica Bartlett, is here in the office with me, and I also appreciate the assistance of my colleagues from our Phoenix office on the Arizona statutory interpretation points. We represent Freedom's Future Fund and vigorously disagree with the reason to believe recommendation that's before you today. Before I go into why we disagree with that, I want to let you know how professional your staff has been to deal with. So they've done a good job and have been professional and responsive throughout this. And if you make a decision that I will disagree with and find reason to believe, we nonetheless will continue to work with them in a conciliation process. So please don't take the strenuous nature of the argument I'm about to make as anything disrespectful to the commissioner or your staff, because they have been, very good to deal with. That said, we strongly disagree with the recommendation regarding express advocacy. A little bit of background here is that Freedom's Future Fund is a non-stock, non-profit corporation, domestic in Delaware. The group's focus is on public policy advocacy on a variety of conservative policies focused on the West. It has primarily focused on border security and on Second Amendment rights. And I would note that this calendar year alone, they've spent over $600,000 on policy, pure policy advocacy that did not mention candidates at all. So could not, isn't even open for contention for express advocacy. It's just pure policy work and no candidates mentioned. So we believe it clearly has a primary purpose of social welfare, and that the advertisements run in Arizona and being contested here are consistent with that purpose of educating people in the West, especially about the importance of border security policies. I would note that the ads in question here highlighted Carrie Lake's position on a variety of issues, including amnesty, border security, and gun control. Each one of the advertisements run by the organization had a call to action in it, which directed the viewer to contact Carrie Lake directly regarding her position on these issues. And the purpose was to persuade her to take a stronger position, especially on border security issues, where she in the past was very supportive of then President Obama and Vice President Biden's policies on amnesty and what President Trump described as open borders. And we have been trying to push candidate Lake and public figure Lake to adopt stronger positions towards the border. Some of these ads may have won her support among the supporters. When we educate the public about her positions on border security, that may help her in terms of some moderate voters who liked the Biden Obama policies. And when they learned that she was supportive of them, that might actually help her. And it may hurt her with some of the more harder line Trump type supporters when they realized that she was not aligned with their policies. Either way, our goal, the group's goal, was to push her to adopt harder line policies on the border. This is important when we get to the legal analysis in front of you. And there's a couple of things we have to look at. The first is the Arizona statute. The second is Arizona case law. And the third is constitutional precedent, which is is most relevant here with the Ninth Circuit and the Fergatch decision. Before I briefly walk through this, I want to remind you ahead of time what my conclusion is going to be, and that's going to be the language in Fergatch, the Ninth Circuit opinion from 1987 that has guided the statutory construct in Arizona and controls what you can and can't do. And Fergatch concludes that if any reasonable alternative can be suggested, then the communications cannot be treated as express advocacy. I remind you, that doesn't mean it has to be the best interpretation. It's just any reasonable interpretation. So starting with Arizona's Clean Election Act, which I know you clearly are very familiar with, and it has both outlines the magic words, so to speak, that come from Buckley v. Vallejo and their footnote 52, which outlines what is considered to be express advocacy. And those phrases about voting for, electing, re-electing, supporting, there's no argument that we have never included any of those in any of our communications. So that's not in question here. The question is the second part of the Arizona test, which says that in context, the advertisement can have no reasonable meaning other than to advocate the election or defeat of the candidate. And that's where we vigorously disagree on the idea that there can be no reasonable interpretation of policy advocacy from our advertisements. And I walked through before the facts in terms of the content of the ads and the purpose of them. And I think that is a very reasonable and happens to be accurate explanation of what the purpose of it is. Your staff and their reason to believe recommendation rely heavily on the language of Committee for Justice and Fairness, the C decision, and they use that to try to push you towards a more holistic view that wants you to sort of push in favor of regulation. And I would urge you to first of all, I don't agree with their conclusion there, because I believe it's still constrained by any reasonable alternative language found in Fergatch. But aside from that, CJF is not a good example here because it can be distinguished in terms of the content of the ads. In CJF, what you had was a call to action that said, tell superintendent board to protect children, not people who harm them. And the ad claimed that when Horn was in the state legislature, he voted against tougher penalties for statutory rape. And when he was on the Board of Education, he voted to allow back into the classroom a teacher who was caught by students looking at child pornography on a school computer. That case was a clear mudslinging attack on a candidate, which illuminated the uncontroversial issue, at least I hope and believe, that the general public all agrees protecting children from sexual predators is important. There weren't two sides to the issue, and it wasn't really a policy issue. It was just a character attack on the candidate. Unlike that ad in CJF, our client's ad educates the public on the hot button issues of gun control and border security and whose public policy solutions are better, and urges people to urge Carrie Lake to support a more strict position on border security. Some people may agree, some people may disagree, but that was the focus, and it's very different than the CJF example. Then CJF and the Arizona cases are both educated by and constrained by the Ninth Circuit's Fergatch opinion. And as a reminder, under Fergatch, the Fergatch standard, speech, quote, when read as a whole and with limited references to external events, must be susceptible of no other reasonable interpretation, but as an exhortation to vote for or against a specific candidate. That's what Fergatch says, and that's at page 864. And the court breaks the components of that standard into three different parts and talks about, first of all, even if it is not presented in the clearest, most explicit language, speech is expressed for present purposes if its message is unmistakable and unambiguous, suggestive of only one plausible reading. Second, they say speech must only be termed advocacy if it presents a clear plea for action, and thus speech that is merely informative is not covered. And then the third factor is it must be clear what action is advocated. Speech cannot be express advocacy of the election or defeat of a clearly identified candidate when reasonable minds could differ as to whether it encourages a vote or for or against a candidate, or encourages the voter to take some other kind of action. And that I'm reading that language from 864 of the opinion. So our ads do not meet those factors of unambiguously suggestive of only one plausible meaning, and having a clear plea to action to vote. We do not meet those standards, and therefore our ad does not meet the constitutional standard in the Ninth Circuit. I'm start out by saying I've been respectful of the staff's recommendation here. And to be blunt, you may think that their interpretation is the best interpretation. So you may read through the reason to believe finding and be compelled that the best interpretation of Freedom Futures Fund and ads is that they're intended or that they do advocate against Kari Lake. You could think that's the best interpretation. But remember, that's not the legal standard here. The legal standard is there a plausible argument? Is there any reasonable argument that the ads are about border security and about policy issues? And if there are those plausible arguments, then under the standards that you're constrained by, this cannot be considered to be express advocacy. I appreciate your giving me the time to address you.
Thank you, Mr. Spies. And I just want to say your comments at the beginning are, in these times, a breath of fresh air and very much appreciated. Your compliments to our staff, your ability to see that reasonable minds can disagree on something. I appreciate that. I do have a couple questions for you, and then I'll turn it over to my fellow commissioners as well. And can I ask, Mr. Spies, are you lead counsel on this matter for the Freedom's Future Fund? You're the principal?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then is there any counsel in Arizona that's helping you with this at the Dickinson Wright office?
Yes.
Okay. So where do you live, sir?
Washington, D.C.
And do you think the fact you live in Washington, D.C., does that impact your ability to determine whether or not an ad like this in Arizona may or may not be, express advocacy?
I would respectfully say no, because this is dealing with U.S. constitutional principles. And, in my time working at the Federal Election Commission, we were dealing with these nationally. And you've got Buckley v. Vallejo, federal standards, and the Ninth Circuit, all of which extends beyond Arizona. So I would respectfully say no.
Well, would you agree with me that someone who lives in Arizona and watches, for example, watches this YouTube ad that I would like to play if we could, to commission me, and I can play it on my screen if I don't think we can play it there. But would you agree with me that someone who lives in Arizona may view this ad and have a different interpretation of it than you who lives in Washington, D.C.? It may impact them much differently as a resident of Arizona than it does someone who lives in D.C.
Mr. Chairman, I absolutely, but I would also respectfully say that proves my point, which is that different viewers, when you're talking about policy advocacy ads, they may be good to some people, bad to other people, and they may see them through different lenses. And that can't be the constitutional standard for express advocacy.
Okay. And I guess, I read in one of your letters, and maybe this is on a different issue of public figure, public official. And are we going to get into that later? Or are we going to get into that? Is that on the table presently?
On the table presently.
Okay. So I think in one of the letters, it states that you're viewing Ms. Lake as a TV journalist and not as a candidate. I guess to me that strains credibility. She hasn't been on the news for several years, 2 or 3 years to my knowledge, and she has been running for governor here in the state of Arizona, and every native Arizona knows that for at least 2 years. So I guess what is the basis to argue that this ad is to try to influence a TV journalist and not a candidate?
Mr. Chairman, I think your comment is fair. That's probably right that people now view her as a candidate. But in terms of the legal analysis, and this is why I didn't focus on that argument, it's not really relevant. The point is that she's an influential public figure who, at least in the past, has been wrong on border security issues. And my client would like to push her to take a stronger position.
Well, when you say she's been wrong on border security issues, I think you mean she's taken a position that your organization, Freedom's Future Fund, disagrees with.
Absolutely. I'm
Okay.
sorry for not being more precise.
No, that's okay. Does Freedom's Future Fund have an office in Arizona? Do you have any employees in Arizona?
No.
Okay. Okay, I don't have any other questions right now, but do we have the ability to play that YouTube YouTube ad during this meeting?
Yes, we can pull that up.
Do you?
I would like to play that so we can all just see what we're talking about.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just real quick.
Would you like to play it now?
I'll pass.
Our border is in crisis. President Trump fought to build a wall, rolled back Obama and Biden's disastrous open border policies. But where was Carrie Lake? Donating to Obama. She helped elect the Obama-Biden administration and enabled their open border policies, but gave nothing to President Trump. Arizona is under attack. How can we trust Carrie Lake when she supported open border politicians? Contact Lake. Tell her it's time to secure our border. Paid for by Freedom's Future Fund.
Okay, thank you for showing that. My fellow commissioners, do you have any questions for Mr. Spees?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Kimball?
Mr. Spees, Chairman Myers hit on a point that I was going to make. It seems like your main point that you're making is that she's not a candidate, or she is a candidate, but that's not what you're involved with. You're delivering this information because she's a widely known public figure who has the ability to influence policy outcomes and who just happens to be a candidate. And I'm wondering if you can tell me, first of all, am I accurate in my understanding of your position? And second of all, how many other campaigns, television campaigns, have you undertaken nationwide against former television journalists who have not been on the air as television journalists for several years, just to say these people are giving you bad information as television journalists several years ago?
So thank you for the question, because I think it's important to clarify that one component of the arguments we made in our rather lengthy responses was that we are trying to influence her positions on issues. And even before she ran for office, she was a influential public figure. And so that's where that fits in to the argument. However, in terms of the legal decision the commission has in front of you today and determining whether the advertisement is express advocacy, that does not depend on the status of the person that is mentioned in the advertisement. It depends on the communication in the advertisement. And again, the question you have in front of you is respectfully to determine, is there any reasonable alternative reason that Freedom's Future Fund might have been running advertisements than to promote or oppose a candidate. And even if you watch the ad and you want to, you have a different takeaway from it, I would urge you to look at the exact, in your packet is the exact script and language of the advertisement that just ran, and the closing line of the advertisement, which is contact Carrie Lake and tell her it's time to secure our border. And that is with contact information on the screen. So if that is a plausible or reasonable interpretation, then this cannot be considered to be express advocacy under the constitutional restrictions thrown out in FERGACH.
I understand that, and I don't know that I'm straining to see if there's another plausible explanation other than the fact she's running for governor, or another reasonable explanation other than the fact she's running for governor. And at this point, I'm not sure I see one. It seems, despite the fact that you don't say vote against Carrie Lake, it seems clear from the context of the entire ad, not just the tagline about contact her at this website, that the intent is directed at, as you called her during your presentation, candidate Lake, not former television journalist Lake.
May I respectfully just note that the question before the commission is not what the intent of the advertisement was, because that would force you to then look into the minds of different people engaging in free speech in the state. So intent is not the issue. The issue is, can the content of the advertisement be reasonably interpreted to have any plausible reason, meaning other than to vote for or vote against her? And, that if plausibly this could be considered to try to persuade her to take a harder line on border issues, which in fact is what it's doing, then even if you think there's a better explanation, it's still not express advocacy.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Spees.
Commissioner Chan, and then also, I don't want to forget about Commissioner Titla, who's on the line, but Commissioner Chan, do you have any questions for Mr. Spees?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not participating.
Oh, I'm sorry, forgive me.
That's all
Mr.
right. Thank
Titla.
you for your consideration.
Yeah, Mr. Titla, do you have any questions for Mr. Spees?
Yeah, I just got on, I was on the phone and I just got on the Zoom now. Is it possible to replay this ad so I can see it?
I think we can manage that.
Okay, thank you.
Can we please replay the ad?
Yes, one moment.
Our border is in crisis. President Trump fought to build a wall, rolled back Obama and Biden's disastrous open border policies. But where was Carrie Lake? Donating to Obama. She helped elect the Obama-Biden administration and enabled their open border policies, but gave nothing to President Trump. Arizona is under attack. How can we trust Carrie Lake when she supported open border politicians? Contact Lake. Tell her it's time to secure our border. Paid for by Freedom's Future Fund.
Commissioner Titla?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I saw the ad. So Freedom Future is saying that this is not express advocacy for Carrie Lake?
That's correct. Actually, I think it would be an express advocacy against Carrie Lake, I think is. But
Is
go
what
ahead.
they're saying?
I'll let Mr. Spees state their position. That my understanding is that Mr. Spees is arguing quite well, in my opinion, that this ad does not constitute express advocacy regarding Ms. Lake. But Mr. Spees, I'll let you answer Commissioner Titla's question.
Yes, Commissioner, thank you for taking the time to view it, and look at it. But to be clear, yes. Freedom's Future Fund believes that this is an advertisement. Our position is to push Carrie Lake to take a stronger position on border security issues. And I should also note, I don't think I mentioned that Freedom's Future Fund has spent 6 figures on advertisements on border security that do not mention any candidates at all. So that was in July of this year. So this is consistent with the policy advocacy purpose of the organization to encourage strong border security policies.
But Mr. Spees, doesn't that fact almost work against you here? Because, you know, it sounds to me, is $6 million the majority of the spending on border issues? You know, you said you spent $6 million on ads that don't mention candidates, which obviously would not be express advocacy against a candidate or pro or against a candidate because there's no candidates mentioned. But the ad we're looking at is obviously distinguished because it does mention a candidate, and not only does it mention that candidate, it provides facts that have nothing to do with border security. For example, how does pointing out that Ms. Lake donated money to Obama and did not donate to former President Trump, how does that fact attempt to influence someone on border measures? To me, I look at that and that's just a play. That's just an advertisement to try to portray her in a negative light and for the Republican Party and to impact her candidacy. And I don't see another reasonable way to view that. That's how I see it right now.
A couple points, Mr. Chairman. First of all, if I said 6 million, then I apologize. I meant to say 6 figures. So.
Oh, you did say 6 figures. I think I that's my fault.
Sadly, the group doesn't have 6 million to spend, but.
Nor do I, Mr. Spees. So go ahead.
But to answer your question about why that's relevant or does that cut against us, I think it goes to the policy advocacy purpose of the organization. And remember, the standard you as commissioners are voting on today is there a reasonable interpretation of the advertisement that it is meant to advocate for stronger border security policies and to push Carrie Lake to take stronger border security policies? So again, that doesn't have to be the best interpretation. You may not even agree with that interpretation. Your only question is that a reasonable interpretation? And if it is, then under FERC, this cannot be considered to be express advocacy.
Okay. Do any other commissioners have any further questions for Mr. Spees? Okay, hearing none. Tom, do you have any additional comments or for the commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, just briefly, and I will be brief. I first want to just re-highlight that we're not asking for, and I think, because of, Mr. Spees just mentioned the other spending, that's part of the reason we're not asking for anything on the primary purpose at all. That's an important fact that Mr. Spees pointed out for the primary purpose issue, and I just want to highlight that so that.
And again, that's the primary purpose of the organization.
Correct. Yeah, I just want to make sure that the record is crystal clear about that. With respect to the advertisements at issue, Committee for Justice and Fairness is good law in Arizona. In fact, as an administrative agency, I think it's the controlling case for us. The advertisement in that case ran, when the candidate was still the superintendent of public instruction, and it claimed that when the person is now running for attorney general, was running for attorney general, the state legislature, he voted against tougher penalties for statutory rape. And then when he was on the Board of Ed, he voted to allow a classroom teacher who had been caught looking at child pornography back in And then the advertisement urged viewers to tell the superintendent to protect children, not people who harm them, displayed photographs of the candidate, and then provided his office number, telephone number as superintendent of public instruction. I think that that advertisement here is the advertisement that we've looked at here today is all but identical. I think, and I do think that and that there is therefore under the case law and our analysis, there's no reasonable alternative meaning. It's not, occasionally we heard go back and forth between plausible and reasonable. The test is really reasonable. And so you take the language, the images together. I think that specific language that I think that is indicative and in fact confirms that this is not subject to any reasonable alternative languages is the language, how can we trust Carrie Lake? The context here is instructive and limited, but trust Carrie Lake to do what? And the answer has to be a nominee for governor. It tips if the entire language does, but I think that's an example of something that just confirms that that's the correct analysis. Additionally, the timing. This had to be done in the primary because this kind of advertisement would simply not be effective in the general. I think that the timing matters in that respect here. And again, confirms that, taken together with the statute, the case law, the advertising language, this analysis, reasonable has to include the circumstances. It is limited and it's looking at outside events. I would note, and Mr. Spees brought up that this, rather than directing you to contact Carrie Lake directly as the CJF ad did, which with then Superintendent Horn, this one actually urges you to go to carrielakefacts.com, which is not affiliated with Carrie Lake, but is in fact another website, a website that belongs to Freedom's Future Fund, where you receive information that reiterates essentially the message of the advertisement. So the call to action, rather than in the case of CJF, where it was call Mr. Horn, who was then in office, where there was a plausible argument, at least plausible, there was a plausible argument, which is not up for the court, but a plausible argument that urged him to take action he presently might take. This call to action, in contrast, specifically calls on you to go to a website belonging to Freedom's Future Fund for the purpose of receiving more information about Carrie Lake. So I think taken together, the test is one of reasonableness. I don't think that, I think therefore that when, credulity is strained to the point of unreasonableness, that we know that this is express advocacy. I think the case law, CJF and Fergesh both confirm that. For those reasons, we would ask with respect to the 16941D and 16958, that the commission find that there's reason to believe a violation may have occurred for failure to file those independent expenditure reports. That's all I have, unless commissioners have questions.
Thank you, Tom. I guess I just have a comment to let kind of folks know where I'm at, and that is, I look at this ad, and Mr. Spees has done an excellent job of setting forth case law and argument. But I look at this ad and I see this as an ad that is express advocacy. And then this last comment, in the last 3 seconds of the ad is sort of an effort, contact Carrie Lake. I think that's an effort to try to end run around this express advocacy, requirement that we have, threshold that we have, and that that's an effort to end run that statute, and it doesn't work. This is my initial impressions, and we'll look at more of this because this is just a reason to believe is that this is an express advocacy ad. So that's where I sit, and I'll be voting to find there's a reason to believe when this comes to a vote. So if any other commissioner wants to comment on this, I welcome them. And Commissioner Titla, you are, your camera is now working. It looks like you're. Okay, all right. All right.
Okay, yeah, this is Commissioner Titla. Thank you. You know, what I'm going to say is not for either party. It doesn't support either party in the election. I don't support Carrie Lake. But with regard to what the attorney said, and watching the ad here, I think it's reasonable to interpret that it is not expressed advocacy right now. That's my initial impression right now. And but once we go to a vote and I hear your opinions, then of course I could be persuaded otherwise. But my initial impression is that you know, is what I said, that there's reasonable explanation that it is not. So that's my inclination right now. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Commissioner Kimball, do you have any comments or?
Mr. Chairman, your comments reflect my views exactly. I do not think there's a reasonable alternative explanation for this advertising. I think you would really have to strain to find something to support that this is anything but an ad to urge voters to vote against Carrie Lake.
Okay, so Tom, you need a motion for us, correct, to find a reason to believe?
Mr. Chairman, the procedures which are outlined in the memo, you know, are that, you know, if the commission were to find, if there were 3 votes of the commission to find reason to believe, then there would be a reason to believe determination. If there were not, then we would not have that determination. But we would, yes, need a motion to proceed.
Okay, so we have a quorum of 3 members. Do we need a majority of the quorum or do we need a majority of the commission?
The rule is 3 votes for reason to believe.
Okay. Okay. Well, does anyone want to make a motion on this issue of whether there is or is not a reason to believe a violation may have occurred?
Mr. Chairman, I'll try. I don't know if I have the wording right, but I would move that the commission determine there is a reason to believe a violation of 16-941B and 16-948 has occurred, and that we authorize our executive director to conduct an investigation.
Okay. And Tom, before we take a vote, I just want to make sure Commissioner Kimball correctly identified the authorities that you're asking us to move under here.
Yeah, it's 16-941 and 16-958.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. I said 16-948. So it's 16-941 and 16-958. I believe I would move the commission determines there's a reason to believe that a violation of those 2 statutes over which the commission has jurisdiction may have occurred, and that we direct the executive director to conduct an investigation.
Okay. All right, we have a motion pending from Commissioner Kimball. Is there a second to that motion?
Chairman, this is Steve Titla, Commissioner Titla, and I second that motion because I think that this should be looked into further. My inclination is not to agree with the underlying principle, but I think that we should look into this further, and this investigation will do that, I think. So I second the motion.
Okay, so we have a motion. It's been seconded. So now we will vote. I will call the roll. Commissioner Kimball, how do you vote?
I vote aye.
Commissioner Titla,
Aye.
Commissioner Chan is abstaining. I'm Commissioner Meyer and I vote aye as well. Commissioner Payton is not present, so the motion carries 3-0. And I just want to, for the record, state that, my comments today are based upon where we're at in the investigation. Like, there's just a reason to believe finding right now. There's no final decisions, and pending further investigation. I will continue to review this and be open-minded on what our investigation finds. So given that, I want to thank Mr. Spies for appearing, but Tom, is there anything further we need to do on agenda item 4?
Mr. Chairman, not from my perspective. I don't know if Mr. Spies has any other record he wants to make. Obviously, I don't have any.
I'll certainly give Mr. Spies that opportunity if there's anything further you want to put on the record, Mr. Spies.
No, sir. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Spies. Okay, so we will move on to agenda item number 5, which is the discussion and possible action on proposed amendments to the Arizona Administrative Code, Title II, Chapter 20, Article 3, Standard of Conduct for Commissioners and Employees, Sections R220-305, reporting suspected violations, and R220-306, disciplinary and other remedial actions. Last month, we had lengthy discussions on how to improve our ethics rules to ensure transparency in the event of any conflicts would arise with the commission. We directed the executive director to develop a rule amendment to capture that discussion. So today we are reviewing amendments to the rules to ensure more transparency. Staff is asking for a vote to forward these amendments for public comments. Tom, you have a summary of the proposed amendments?
Yes.
I believe it's in our packet.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and Natalia Terry Gregorian with Richards and Moskowitz is here. She has been working with me on developing this long bill on developing this group. If you have this amendment, if you have any questions for her, we essentially what we did is we took the issues we talked about last month and kind of put them into a rule format. What essentially these amendments will do is say, if there's particular information about a commission ethical issue of some kind or conflict issue, really principally, it would allow our the chairman and the executive director to process that, and then allow the commission to come together to discuss it and have a kind of a collective decision that would be enforceable under our rules to the extent that we have to the extent that you can. In other words, obviously there are certain limitations on what the commission can do to a commissioner that are statutory, but we tried to come up with something that would that would create a public process, be transparent, and allow the commission to weigh in. The issue that we identified through this process was that really our rules did not really deal. It had a process laid out for how to deal with an employee issue, but really didn't have a kind of a regulatory place for the commission to talk amongst itself about commissioners. So we wanted to create that. And so we're asking for approval of this to circulate it for public comment, and then we will, return it with whatever comments we get in the next several months, probably the next 2 to 3 months. I don't know if, and obviously, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I just want to make sure. I don't know if Natalia has anything she wants to make sure we tell you.
Good afternoon, commissioners, and I have Bill Richards here with me as well. We believe that Mr. Collins summarized the proposed amendments pretty thoroughly. It essentially changes the current rules from being aimed exclusively at employees to being more generalized and provides a process for addressing complaints.
Thank you. I had two comments on R2 20-305, and that is, I guess the first one's a question and the second one's a comment. The first question is that subsection B of this rule gives the chair of the commission authority to decline to require a response and then and state why this is meritless or should not be an issue. And I just want to confirm, does the chair, that's more authority. I mean, you're kind of giving the chair unilateral authority to make a decision there. Is there a source of that? I just want to make sure that that's something that's allowed under the statutory scheme administrative code that we have. So that was my first question.
I mean, I'm to take a stab at that, or if Natalia or Bill, you want to go for, whichever, however you want it. I don't have a preference.
Well, Tom, I'd be happy to address it just briefly, and then obviously certainly your comments can elaborate on that. I believe that the structure here is intended to allow the chairman to exercise what is essentially kind of an inherent jurisdictional function to ensure that where you have a clearly unmerited allegation. I mean, if, for example, someone came in and said that I saw, Commissioner X in the grocery store and they looked at me funny, and therefore I believe that, they have a conflict of interest here, that you could simply say, well, we're not going to hear that. We're not going to put that on the agenda. It's almost really an agenda setting exercise. It isn't intended to allow you to kind of make the final up or down nuanced decision where there's at least a facially arguable allegation of a conflict. It may be that, more precise language is needed to make that absolutely clear, but that's the intention behind that language.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question about that too.
Sure, go ahead.
The chair or executive director, if it's the chair who's the subject of the claim, do we need to have an alternative listed in there, like the next most senior member of the commission? We don't have a vice chair. I don't know if I'm seeing an issue where there is none. I just wondered if we needed an alternative in case the chairman is the person who's the subject of the complaint.
Mr. Chair, I guess.
Can I respond to that quickly? I think, we can write rules till we're all old and gray if we try to anticipate everything that's going to come up. I think in that instance, it's going to be on the executive director's shoulders, and I would not try to write that into the rule. That's just how I would see it. And I welcome our counsel and Tom's thoughts on that, but that's just my initial reaction I wanted to share.
I mean, Mr. Chairman, I think that the idea is that, that it would sort of devolve to the executive director from the chair. There's a little bit of, I think both the questions, Commissioner Chan and Chairman, your earlier question, they get at an issue that's a real concern. And I think that the issue is that we live, just to harken back to some of your comments earlier today, Mr. Chairman, not to put too fine a point on it, but the reality is that we are all living in a universe in which any authorization it can be assumed to be taken to its maximum place beyond what the intent of anyone was when they composed things. That is the world that we live in today. That we have seen that again and again and again, especially in elections. But as Mr. Chairman noted, that is hard to account for because we now live in the real world, right? Where political decisions, government decisions that were, where the policy is clear, are now subject to a political influence that is just beyond, I think, what any of us really believed was true some time ago. And so, we want to be conscious of that, but also, this body has had a, has all of you and your long service, your endless service to the commission, have recognized the values that we have and have created a culture that we hope will ensure that those folks who come after us all will follow these as they're in the spirit they're intended. So, those are hard, nuanced decisions. Bill, I think, identified correctly. We did, by saying clearly, we tried to say, we want this to not be the marginal case, but the extraordinary case where it is something that's just off the wall. I think that we can see if folks will make. I guess what I'm trying to say, if you ask me, obviously we're comfortable with this draft for purposes of public comment. As we go along, if we get comments to say, look, you need to tighten this up, or it's going to potentially ratchet up things with the chair or the executive director, that's certainly a consideration. But I do think that both of your comments and questions are important things to be aware of in the context we are all now working in.
Go ahead, Commissioner Chin.
The only other item that I noticed was the response shall be due 5 days. And on one hand, 5 days is not a tiny amount of time, but I just wondered if we should consider making it 10 days. I don't know where we came up with the 5 days. I just was curious about that. Again, I'm not sure that it's an insufficient amount of time. It just seems like, depending on how voluminous something might be, I tend to think of things and think the worst case scenario. So I just wanted to throw that out there regarding the 5 days.
Mr. Chairman, I do have an answer for that. Why the 5 days?
Sure.
It's not a particularly thoughtful answer. It's just that's what we require for response to complaints when they come in against candidates and IEs and stuff.
Well, then that seems fair. Thank you.
I was going to make the same comment that I thought 5 days seemed tight and suggest we make it 10 days. That's my suggestion. This is many of us have full-time other jobs we're working, and it can be not a good situation to have to do that in 5 days. It could be challenging. If there's a compelling reason to have it be 5 days, and I'm not sure that I heard one there with the candidates having to respond in 5 days, because it's just a different issue, but I would suggest we make that 10 days.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Commissioner Kimball.
Speaking as someone who's already old and gray.
Well, I won't even have that opportunity to go gray, so just relish that.
I think your initial point was, should the chair be involved in this process at all? And I just don't understand why the chair. It seems like it ought to be just the executive director, and I don't understand the chair or executive director, how we would decide who's going to do it. Why not just make it the executive director?
Okay. I don't feel strongly one way or the other, frankly. Tom, was there a reason why the chair was included? The way I see this playing out, if it's just the executive director, is you get one of these complaints, you're going to probably call the chair and say, hey, this came in, let's talk about this, and then you'd make a decision. But I don't feel strongly about it, so I'm open to be convinced why I should or should not.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Kimball, I think the only thing, that I think that Chairman Myers right, that at least how and all of you have been chair, I mean, how we do things, that's how we would do it, is we would call you and say, hey, what do you want to do about this? Beyond that, I mean, I don't think there's a lot, I don't have any, I'm not married to this language in any serious way. Bill would tell you, I don't think we have any strong.
Well, I'm not opposed to putting this language that we have out for public comment, and then we can.
Sure, but I mean,
And I think, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think this is almost, when we start looking at the next rule, and the chair and executive director are kind of running with the investigation. As I read this, that same issue gets brought into Rule 306 as well. So I'm saying we should have this discussion as to both rules and not have it twice regarding this issue of the chair and the executive director. So, but go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add one point, and this goes back also to Commissioner Chan's point earlier. I think that the language here anticipates that the chair, if the chair was the subject of the allegation, the chair would probably recuse himself from making any decision at that point in time, just as a matter of form, but also because that's what the rest of the rules suggest that they should do, probably. And so this just makes it clear that, in that sort of circumstance, the executive director also can make that sort of decision and gives that flexibility.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone have any further comments on the rules suggestions here to put out to comment? I'll note on 306 paragraph D, there's a typo. The second sentence, the first word needs to be capitalized after, but that's simple. But any other comments on these rules? Okay. And then if not, I assume you need a vote from us, Tom, to put these out for public comment.
Mr. Chairman, yes. So what I would recommend by way of the record here would be, a motion to approve the draft rules or the amendment for public comment. And then I think to make the record clear, to the extent that you want to, if there's any specific changes that you want to make, it might be helpful to try to articulate them, in that motion, if that's something people want to do. The advantage of doing that now is that it's just at some you got to get into the language at some point, and if we think that's going to be a thing, I think I don't want to press. Whatever we do is fine. I just think that it's easier to from a pure paperwork perspective in terms of the Arizona administrative record. It's just easier to, if you want it to be a certain way, make it that way the first time than it is to go back in and change it once we get the ball rolling. Because then we got to get into an analysis of if it's substantive and all this other stuff that we don't have to do if everybody wants it to be, for example, executive, where it says commissioner, chairman, or executive director, and have it just say executive director, for example. That would be the kind of change that if you're comfortable with changing that now, go ahead and do that.
And I forgot I had one other question on 306.
Yep.
E1. What do we mean by voluntary remedial action? Does that mean recusal? Do we need to? Does that mean resigning from the commission? What does that mean? What does that mean?
I think actually, Mr. Chair, I think that could take all of those forms. What we're talking about there is just an expression of opinion to inform the commissioner about whom the complaint has been made, what the majority of commissioners think they should do, would be most appropriate for them to do. And I think that most likely would take the form of, we believe you should recuse yourself from X, Y, or Z decisions. But I suppose in the case where the conflict created a problem for issues across the board, then the rest of the commission could legitimately reasonably say, we think that you ought to resign, one position or the other to end the conflict.
And what weight would that decision have by the majority of the commission? Because I mean, I'm just like Tom said, taking this authority to its ultimate extreme. We got 5 commissioners. We got 3 commissioners that don't like someone. They could find something and then vote that guy out, or woman out. So that's just sort of the stuff we need to be thinking about.
And Mr. Chairman, the way I would read this particular provision is that option number 1 is simply a public expression of opinion by the majority of commissioners that this particular charge or allegation of conflict, appears to be legitimate, and that we believe that Commissioner X should take the following actions. That actually does not require or mandate legally that commissioner take those actions. However, if later on a party to a proceeding were to sue and ask that the court enforce the conflict rules, it would be strong evidence, certainly, in favor of that sort of a legal complaint. The second option is a disqualification vote, which is going to be case by case. It's going to be proceeding by proceeding. And I suppose ultimately could result in the rest of the commissioners saying on almost every single action before the commission that you're disqualifying this particular commissioner. But it is not a wholesale vote to remove them from office, which I think would be a problem for the commission. I'm not sure that the commission's authority would extend to that. And certainly we do believe it would extend to disqualifying the commissioner from individual votes.
Okay. Well, thank you for your explanations. That answers my questions. Does any other commissioner have any other questions? If not, does anyone want to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner Chan.
Just a final comment before we make a motion. I think if I understood our conversation, that the main thing that we might be changing before we put this out for public comment is just in 305B, changing the 5 days to 10 days. I don't know that I heard a consensus about removing the chair from the process of declining or in either of these sections. I just wanted to clarify.
I heard Commissioner Kimball say that he's fine putting it out for public comment in the way it is. Yeah. Okay. Commissioner Titla, did you have any comments on this before we hopefully get a motion to vote on this? Okay. Anyone want to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we approve the amendments for public comment as written. Do I need to move them separately?
Do you want to?
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. I thought we were, forgive me. Let me withdraw my motion and make a new one. Tom, do I need to do these separately? Kara?
Sure.
Okay. So Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
No, I should know the answer.
No,
to that,
it's okay.
I think the answer is yes.
It's probably best to be clear.
The answer is or.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the amendment to section R220-305 with the only change to subsection B, making that 10 days rather than 5 days.
And that it be issued for public comment, correct?
And that it be issued for public comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, you're very welcome. Is there a second to that motion?
I will second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All right, we're going to call the roll on the motion. I'm going to start with Commissioner Chan.
I vote aye.
Commissioner Kimball.
Aye.
Commissioner Titla.
Aye.
And Commissioner Meyer, I vote aye as well. So that motion carries unanimously as to 305. Is there a motion for R2-20-306?
Mr. Chairman, this is Commissioner Chan. I move that we approve the amendment to R2-20-306 for public comment as written.
I will second that.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Again, we will call a roll on the vote here. Commissioner Chan,
I vote aye.
Commissioner Kimball,
Aye.
Commissioner Titla,
Aye.
and Commissioner Meyer. I vote aye as well. So that motion carries 4-0, and I'm assuming that won't be a problem to correct that typo. That we don't need to have a motion on that, correct?
Yes, that's good.
Okay, so that wraps up agenda item 5. Thank you, Mr. Richards and Ms. I don't want to butcher your last name, but thank you. So what was your name for the record? I want to get it right.
Claire Gregorian.
I'm sorry, what was it?
Claire Gregorian.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Narciso. I appreciate it. All right, so now we'll move on to agenda item number 6, which is discussion and possible action on proposed meeting dates for September through December of 2022. I know Paula had circulated dates. Anyone have any questions or comments on those dates? And I know I had put one comment in. Okay, that was taken out. Okay, does anyone have any comments, or can we have a motion to approve these meeting dates?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the meeting dates.
Is there a second?
I second.
All right. Motion to approve meeting dates. So we're going to vote, call the roll. Commissioner Chan,
I vote aye.
Commissioner Kimball,
Aye.
Commissioner Titla,
Aye.
and Commissioner Meyer. I vote aye as well. We are safe and secure for our future meeting dates. On to item number 7, which is public comment. This is the time for consideration of comments and suggestions from the public. Action taken as a result of public comments will be limited to directing staff to study the matter or rescheduling the matter for further consideration and decision at a later date, or responding to criticism. Does any member of the public wish to make comments at this time?
We
Is
do have,
any-
we have one member of the public, but I don't think she wants to comment.
Comment?
I don't know. So I think we're good.
No comment. And then anyone,
You're like it's like a standing offer.
Mr. Chairman, just to make clear.
My name is Rifko Knox. I'm sorry.
I had a sneaking suspicion that was Ms. Knox.
Where do I go?
Good morning, Ms. Knox.
I am Rifko Knox. I'm a longtime resident of the state of Arizona, and a longtime voter, and I've been following the actions of the Citizens Clean Election Division for I don't know about 10 or 12 years. And I just appreciate very much the commitment of all the commissioners and of the staff. I was very, the first obviously public meeting that I've attended in quite a while. So it's, I had a hard time finding the building, which is why I came in late. That's beside the point. That's not a policy issue. I just did want to say, like I say, I think the professionalism of staff are just overwhelming. I continue to be massively impressed. I continue to mention clean elections as a source of information, an invaluable source of objective information that you have wherever I possibly can. And finally, I was very pleased actually to see the Mary Jo Fitzel article. I actually sent her an email and thanked her for highlighting the issue of the ongoing terms of all of the commissioners. And I thank you all for unbelievable commitment and service to an organization or a state agency, or technically you are, that is really it's such a critical component of our democratic system. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak and to continue to participate in meetings, whether it's through Zoom or in person. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Knox. Is there there's no other comment in the room there, correct?
Correct.
And then anyone online, I'm not sure if anyone there, if you may also send comments to the commission by mail or email to ccec@azcleanelections.gov. That brings us to agenda item number 8, which is adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chairman, before I make the motion to adjourn, I just want to acknowledge that I think Commissioner Titla, if this was an employee position or an elected official position, I think he almost would have vested in the state retirement system by now. He's been serving so long. So I just thought I wanted to recognize him for that. That is, of all of us, he is definitely had the most perseverance. So I just wanted to thank him for still being with us. Because as time marches on, I'm sure we all feel that a little bit. And with that, I would move that we adjourn this meeting.
I would second that.
Okay, and I want to thank Commissioner Chan. I agree. Thank you, Commissioner Titla. It's always great to have you. And you have me by 1 year, on the commission. So, okay, so we have the motion to adjourn. I'll call the roll. Commissioner Chan.
I vote aye.
Commissioner Kimball.
Aye.
Commissioner Titla.
Aye, and thank you for your comments. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. And Commissioner Meyer, I vote aye. We are adjourned. Our next meeting is September 29th.